Hey, how's it going? Okay, so xlsxwriter. This is going to be a quick introduction to all the things that you can do when you want to export Python data to Excel. So why learn and implement xlsxwrite-ing? Well, for starters, I'm saying xlsxwrite-ing because there are several libraries out there that you can use. This is just one of them. So what these libraries do is they enable automation. And this is a significant reduction in technical debt because you save time, you can avoid formatting mistakes, which always will happen when you're entering things manually into Excel files. It allows you to create consistent product styling for your themes. So if you're at a company, for example, and you're regularly producing Excel files for your client, there's a big advantage in all of those files having a consistent format. Well-written code is easily transferred between people and teams, which means that you can work together as a team to create a library, for example, that makes use of xlsxwriter to create custom functions that you might want to use when you're creating your products. And it jives with things like version control. So it amounts to a technical investment because it saves you time and creates a more reliable product. So the basic format of an xlsxwriter script is that you will have a workbook, which is pretty much equivalent to the Excel file itself. You notice when you instantiate it, you give it a file path and a file name, and it has several worksheets. So the worksheets will contain our data and our formatting. So that is where most of your work is going to happen. But it's important to know about the workbook and its three most important functions, which is the add format function, which allows you to add various styling formats to your workbook that you can later use in the worksheets, in adding the worksheets themselves, and then finally closing the workbook, which then actually creates the Excel file on your system. So the structure is you're going to be instantiating your workbook, you're going to be instantiating your worksheets, writing and formatting your data, and then finally saving and closing the file. So let's start with a simple example. Say you want to write the string Spock to a cell in your worksheet. In this case, the worksheet analysis. Well, the .write function on the worksheet, it will need a cell reference and it will need some data. There's two ways you can reference the cells. You can either just use an Excel style of referencing cells. So A1 in this case will be the first row in column A, or you could use indexes. So you would say add Kirk to the second row in column A by referencing the row with the index of 1 and the column with the index of 0. And you'll notice we start counting from 0. So row 1 corresponds to the second row. Row 0 would correspond to the first row, and so forth. And the cool thing about .write is you can actually leverage it within loops. So if you want to add a bunch of data to a column, you can create a loop and then use write for each row and cell that you want to loop through. We'll see more of this later in this presentation. So another thing that you can do is you could add functions to the cells. Now this is super useful because sometimes your deliverable is for a non-programmer. It might be someone who wants to use your Excel file as a baseline and then continue working, adding their own analyses to it. It could be very useful for them to be able to see what functions have been used to create the data. So in this case, we're applying the sum function to sum up the values of 3 cells. Another thing that you can do is you can add formatting. In this case, we're creating a success cell, and we're calling the workbook's add format function to add this format called success cell to your library of formats that you can use. And that's a background color of green and a border with a style of 1. And then we apply this to our worksheet analysis by using its write function. So we're referencing a cell, we're sending it the function of pi, and then we're applying the format of success cell to that cell. Now one of the cool things you might notice here is in the add format function, we're sending it something that kind of looks like JSON. And this is pretty cool because you can actually create themes in JSON files that then you then can apply in your scripts. Just like writing to cells, you can write columns. The difference here is that rather than referencing a particular cell, you're giving it a start cell. So in this case, we say start adding our data in cell A1, so that's the first row in column A, and then just keep adding the data until we run out of data. So we're sending it a list in this case. You could also send it a tuple. You could store that list in a variable and then send it to the right column function. Either way is fine. And if you then want to apply even fancier conditional formatting, you could use the conditional format function on the worksheet. So what you do is you give the conditional format function a reference to a range of cells, in this case cells A1 to A6, and then you apply a format if the values in that cell fulfill a particular condition. So in this case, we're saying if the values in cells A1 to A6 are smaller or equal to 5, apply the success cell format to them. And we can see that in the results there, that 3, 1, and 4 receive the success cell format, whereas 8, 6, and 10 do not. Just like writing columns, you can write rows. And the principle here is the same. You give it a start cell and a list of data. A tuple is fine too. And then it will just add the data as long as there's something to add. This is super useful when you're building, for example, table headers. You could send it a list of column headers in a table that you want to send to your clients. So here's an example. I mentioned earlier that we could use loops, right? So if you want to use a loop to populate the data in your Excel file, this is an example of how to do it. In this case, we're creating a function called fill columns, and we're sending it a bunch of column names, a start cell and an end cell, and then we just apply some random numbers to these to create a matrix. And if you want to go even further and add some conditional formatting to these, you can actually create something that's sort of like a dashboard. So in this case, we're also creating an apply conditional format function, and we're using two conditional format functions on our worksheet. In one case, we're saying if the values are equal to or less than 5, we give it the success cell format. But if they're larger than 5, we give it the fail cell format. So this can become very powerful once you know the basic building blocks of the xlsxwriter module. And that's just a quick introduction. You'll learn way more about this and how to apply it in the upcoming tutorials. So good luck!